Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Well, as faculty and staff and students and parents and grandparents and everybody who loves and is connected to children and teachers who teach children and people who feed children, everybody in the school system, we are back pretty much in many respects in full stride. Well, our guest this morning is the newly appointed Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Cade Brumley, and we welcome him to the OPT Network. Dr. Brumley, good morning and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I look forward to the conversation and sharing out some important information with your audience.
Indeed. First of all, Dr. Brumley, let us say congratulations on the new position.
Thank you. Yeah, at this point, I've been on the job about 3 months, but with COVID, it feels like 3 years.
I can only imagine.
We all know what COVID time feels like in our personal lives, and it has been no different here at work. But very thankful, very blessed, and just looking forward to the opportunity to help support our schools throughout the state, but also push us to the next level.
Sure. So for people who are not familiar, Dr. Brumley, with your background, tell us a little bit about your matriculation through the educational system and being an educator.
So my first grade teacher, while I was in elementary school, asked a classroom of students what they were going to be when they grew up. And so some students said, oh, I'm going to be a baseball player. I'm going to be a nurse, a fireman. I said, I want to be the school principal. And so I invested my time from that point on, from first grade, working to be an educational leader. I saw for me that as an opportunity to better myself, but also, I guess, from a social justice type equity lens, also very early on saw that if I were in a position such as that, I would be able to help other people.
From first grade?
First grade classroom. Yep. I remember the experience very well. Interestingly, a couple of decades later, that was in Converse, Louisiana, my hometown. A couple of decades later, I was actually the school principal, and in that very school where I made those comments.
You're kidding. In the very school.
The very school. So the very school where I made those comments, a couple of decades later, I was setting up a STEM computer lab in that same classroom, and it was a bit of an overwhelming experience emotionally, but again, just thankful to be there. Educational matriculation. I'm a graduate from Northwestern State in Natchitoches, where I received my bachelor's degree, met my wife, and went on to teach in the Caddo Parish school system at J.S. Park Middle School. Taught there, then worked on a master's degree in educational administration at LSU Shreveport campus. Later became a basketball and baseball coach in Sabine Parish and taught English and social studies. Went over to Texas and completed a doctoral degree in educational leadership at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches. Ended up taking on an assistant principal job and a principal job and assistant superintendent, and then served 6 years in DeSoto Parish Schools as the superintendent there. During that time, served as the president of the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents. Ultimately decided to take a position in Jefferson Parish, a large urban system, the largest in the state, in South Louisiana, where we served about 51,000 kids as superintendent. Spent a few years there, and when the position came open as state superintendent, it was not something that I was expecting to come open. I thought about that, prayed about that, and ultimately just felt compelled to put in an application. As a native Louisianian, I want better outcomes for our kids here. I want better outcomes for our families and our communities and the state as a whole. And it's very personal to me. And I take this work with great significance. And I just think that we can all do better if we're working together in the right way.
So essentially, Dr. Brumley, it sounds like you've been preparing for this moment literally your whole life.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
I mean, you just know that you know, and you know when you know. So when you arrive at this moment and everything that you've worked for all these years, and you finally step into your destiny, COVID is there. How do you then create an atmosphere that will be conducive to learning with all of the anxiety, all of the angst, all of the uncertainty of sending kids back to school, teachers back to school, and everybody that it takes to make school work?
Yeah, you're spot on with that assessment. The things that I want to be talking about, such as early childhood education or kids reading by the end of third grade on grade level, or career and technical education or college enrollment, the things that really matter to me are not the things I'm spending the majority of my day talking about, because what matters right now is how do we safely have school for our kids and our employees. And so we have been working with the Louisiana Department of Health, with some of our major hospitals throughout the state and some of our finest medical providers to put out sets of recommendations and guidance for our schools so that they can safely reopen. And I've just been so impressed with how our educators have responded. And I know we'll probably talk through some of that later in the show, but just as a reminder, and to your point, everyone is nervous, everyone is anxious because we've never done this before. We are writing this book as we go through this process. All of us in community together are doing that. And if we can just not point fingers, if we can have high expectations for each other, but give everyone grace and patience and flexibility and be nimble with each other, that's going to go a long way. And I think we'll see a ton of innovations as a silver lining that will make education in our state greater in years to come.
So now that you're over the state's schools, the totality, going back in, there was a decision that parents could make, whether kids would attend virtually or whether they would be in the classroom. When you come to the think tank with your team, what does the think tank come up with about how to make this work? Because I've spoken to a lot of people that those first days, they just have not been easy.
Yeah, that's right. One of the earliest decisions that I made was to ask every school system in the state to have a virtual only option, because I knew that some families would not feel comfortable sending their kids, the best they have, back to that brick and mortar facility. And systems responded to that. They have done that. But you have to think about, we've taught the same way for a few thousand years. We've had someone in front of us. We've had a level of engagement. And over a few months, we've had to flip a switch and transform the way that we're teaching fundamentally. We've come a long way over about 4 or 5 months, but we still have a long way to go. We have 800,000 students in our state that are in the education system and about 1,700 schools. And we have tried to take that grouping of schools across the entirety of the state and tried to create community and make it smaller through constant conversations, through providing resource and tools, because the work is hard. And we don't know when this will end. We're hopeful for a vaccine, but we have to work in the moment, and we have to have high expectations, and we have to make sure that we find a way to get every kid an education. We have to keep everyone safe as well.
Absolutely. Our guest this morning, if you're just joining the conversation, is Dr. Cade Brumley. He is the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, and we're talking about this school year, what it looks like, and what the state is doing to keep our kids safe, our teachers safe, and all of the people that are connected with learning safe. So for some, this is the second week, pretty much, I guess, the second or third week that we are back in session. Now, with so many cases of COVID, not high cases, but we're still seeing in New Orleans about 150 kids had to be quarantined because 20 cases of COVID. In Rapides Parish, I think the last number was 30 or 40 kids tested positive, and I'm sure that there are swaths of children and maybe even teachers that are testing positive. What are you saying to parents that are filled with anxiety and those teachers that are filled with anxiety?
We set forth minimum standards around number of students who could be on a school bus, number of students who could be in a classroom, cohorting of kids, face coverings, disinfecting. We set forth minimum standards on all those things, working with the experts on this virus, some of the best medical professionals in this nation. And the standards that we set forth are on par with anything that you'll see in this country that is considered good and positive. And so we are consistently and frequently in communication with school systems to make sure that they have the support that they need to implement those standards correctly. And we believe that it was also important to recognize that COVID could look different in different communities. In an urban setting, you could have an outbreak, whereas in a rural setting, you may not be experiencing that at that time. So the way we set up the standards, it allows systems to toggle back and forth between more and less restrictions. And also it allows them to employ different models of schooling based on where they are. But fundamental to your point and your question is the parent's right to have a choice in their child's education. And I think coming out of COVID, I think one of the innovations that I think will be a lasting innovation will be cemented is the parent's right to empower their choice on how their child receives an education.
So I think that's an interesting point, because there are some parents that have the ability to have either themselves or someone there consistently while their child or their children are virtual learning. And then there are some children that are just left to their own devices because maybe those parents just have situations in their home. We know that certain homes are more vulnerable, and maybe they're just not willing to send their children into that environment for fear of bringing COVID back. And so I've asked the superintendents here locally in Rapides and Avoyelles Parish, what and how is accountability going to happen for those people who are virtually or supposed to be virtually learning?
We work with some of the leaders across the nation on virtual instruction, with some of the leaders in our state. And about a week and a half ago, we released best practices in virtual instruction to all of our systems, and we asked them to look at the practices that they intended to employ, balance those against these best practices, and see where they stand. And it answers many of the questions that I think you're referring to. What will engagement look like? How often will we engage? Will the curriculum be the same virtually versus face-to-face? It includes all of that information plus much more. And we also realize that parents are questioning, what is virtual instruction? What should I be expecting from my school? And how can I help my own kid?
Right.
And so we released a companion document, a parent's guide to virtual instruction that shares out that information. And so that's at our website at Louisiana Believes. If you go to our website, Louisiana Believes, all of that information is loaded up right there for parents to access.
Mm-hmm. And so I was talking to a teacher just this morning before we had this conversation, as I've been talking to many teachers. And one of the concerns for teachers, because I've spoken to a lot of people as our family was fostering and has now adopted 2 small children. So we're back in the school system as well. And so I've talked to several people that said, that first week was just disastrous. It was just tough and hard. And one of the things that this educator said is, with so many people bombarding the internet just didn't have the capability to handle the overload. And so there was a lot of sites that were crashing. What's going to happen to make that better?
Yeah. So in April, uh, we we surveyed families, and we learned that about 33% of students across the state did not have access to internet in their home. So about 1/3 did not have access. We put in place some measures. We help support systems and families. Right now, that number is about 1 in 4 that do not have access at home. So you think, well, that's not much of a shift from 33% to now only 25%. But if you look at the total numbers, it's about 60,000 kids that we've been able to connect over a few months. And so that is more pressure on that system, that internet system, because you also have higher ed that's now on that system more often, and more people are working from home using that system of internet. And so that's why I think we can come up with some short-term solutions to ensure that every child has internet at home, and systems are working through that and doing that. But those things are expensive and they're not sustainable. And so we have to have a broader conversation about high quality internet across our entire state for everyone. I'm talking a broadband conversation, because we're going to need that moving forward. And we have champions in the legislature. We have individuals on our State Board of Education. But this is going to take everybody working together, from the provider level as well as governmental agencies and policymakers, to ensure as quickly as we can we have broadband across our state.
All right, let's do this. Let's take a break here, Dr. Brumley. But when we come back, I want to talk about your vision beyond COVID and what that looks like. Dr. Cade Brumley, the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, is our guest this morning. Stay on point. We're back after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. As we are all entering the new normal and what education looks like, we thought it was really important that we speak to the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Cade Brumley. And Dr. Brumley, first, we want to thank you for taking the time and giving us this opportunity to hopefully, I don't know if we can quell those fears, but at least we can begin to talk about them. And parents and grandparents and people who are sending kids to school, and our teachers and our faculty, at least we can begin to open up this conversation just a little bit deeper. And before we talk about your vision, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the amount of anxiety that children are feeling and that teachers are feeling, but especially those kids that may not have the mental bandwidth to deal with anxiety. And we know that suicide is an issue that is happening. Are the school systems set to have these conversations or these assemblies where we really take a deeper dive into our kids' feelings of uncertainty?
So we're all dealing with this. You
Right.
know, we are experiencing the loss of our ordinary, the loss of our normal, things that we would ordinarily do, relationships and gatherings that we would ordinarily have that lift our spirit, keep us going into the next week. We're unable to have those in the same way that we've had those during our entire lifetimes. And so, you know, we have to understand that we don't know everything that our neighbor is going through, and we don't know everything that a child is going through at home, and we have to be sensitive to that. We also know that even prior to COVID, our students, so many of them have struggled with emotional and mental and behavioral health needs, and our school systems across the state can never afford enough counselors and social workers to meet the moment for all of those children. And so that's why it's important then and now to have conversation about removing barriers so that external providers such as licensed counselors and social workers and mental health professionals can access the schools, access the kids, and provide support, because this was a challenge prior to COVID, and now it's just been worsened. That's one of the reasons why I think we have to beat back this virus, because we need our kids in physical school to some degree. Um, Students need socialization. They need interaction. And many of our kids have been away from that for 5 months, going on 6 months. And sadly, some of those kids have been in environments at home that aren't hopeful, positive environments. And we need to be prepared to combat that.
Are we prepared? Are we prepared to combat it like we should? Because oftentimes teachers are our first lines of defense. Teachers can sense what's going on with students. Are they prepared?
I think I think teachers have always been that way. And you throw in the mix of social workers and assistant principals and athletic coaches and band directors, and we've wrapped kids up in love and service for a long time. Then you think about support staff, such as bus drivers, who are the first smile a kid might get at the day, and the cafeteria worker who gives a friendly hello to a kid in the morning as they go through the line. And so this is why I think we need our kids back in school as quickly as we can have them. We released on our Louisiana Believe site a few resources for mental health for our schools, so that they have a screener for kids who may need a screening to identify mental or emotional or behavioral health needs. And then they have a process in which they will respond to those. But we don't know what level of preparation is needed, because we understand prior to COVID the amount of concern and trauma that we saw from kids and coming out of the communities. And we know that it's going to be worse, or we believe it will be worse, after experiences coming out of 5 and 6 months away from us. We also have to realize that some of our kids have experienced loss. COVID has hit some communities deeply and severely. And so we have kids who have lost family, friends, grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and parents. And so I am confident that our educators, more than anyone else, will love those children, will pick up on those needs, and will ensure that kids get the support that they need.
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. And I believe that teachers are just as big a champions as our healthcare providers and all of the people on the front lines. And now the federal government is saying that teachers are mandatory and they are frontline workers. And as I heard that report, I wondered, is that putting undue pressure or even more pressure on our teachers, who many of them are at an age where they're taking care of aging parents? Many of them have their own comorbidities or their own pre-existing conditions. So are we doing enough, you think, as a state, as a community, to protect the mental well-being of our teachers, who are now, teachers have always been champions, but now they've put on a cape that, I mean, is so big. Are they prepared to meet this moment?
Well, teachers unfortunately have had to be, and school leaders, all things to all people for a long time. Nurses, counselors, security personnel, you name it. Our educators have had to do that. Not many people went to school to be a teacher thinking they would be doing those things.
Right.
They love children, they have content they want to teach. They thought that's what they would be doing, but the profession has had to evolve. And I do think that we have to treat our educators in the same way that we treated doctors and nurses in the spring, rightfully so, as heroes. And I think it's not only good for the teacher to understand their value, but I think it's also positive for teenagers and kids who are seeing them and might be making career decisions down the road, because we don't have enough teachers in the state, especially in some of our areas like high school math or science or special education. And we have to be cultivating that workforce from our teenagers now and our kids in elementary schools. And so they need to see from the communities that teachers are heroes, and that will give them something to aspire to be, or else we're going to get to a point in our state where we're not having the workforce that we need to have school.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Brumley, preparing for this moment and just living a life of educating and administrating in school systems across this state and even in Texas. What is your vision beyond COVID-19?
Yeah, that's the conversation I want to be able to have. You know, I think that early childhood education, birth to four, is the greatest educational challenge of our generation. Too many of our kids come to us not prepared for kindergarten, unable to count to 10, know the difference in their colors, basic skills. It's over half of the students in the state of Louisiana that come not prepared for kindergarten. In our most impoverished communities, sometimes that number is 90% of kids who are coming to kindergarten not ready. And so we need to be investing in quantity of seats so that every child who is birth to four who needs a seat can have one. And we need to make sure those are quality seats. I think that's the most important thing that we need to do. Beyond that, making sure that every child by the end of third grade is on grade level with reading. We know, and I can point to the studies that will show this, that kids, if they're not reading on grade level by the end of third grade, are 2 to 3 times more likely to be a high school dropout. Sadly, we know that 80% of people in America's prisons right now don't have a high school diploma. And so as we track from third grade on through the years into high school and beyond, elevating career and technical education, vocational skills, finding more aggressive ways to make sure that some students are able to leave high school and able to get a good high-paying job once they leave high school. We've diminished the value of career and technical education for too long, and we've told people you're lesser than if you don't have a college education. That's just not right, and it's not true. So investing and realigning some things there. And then also connecting high school students through dual enrollment opportunities with local colleges and universities so that they're able to get a taste and a sense of college before they step on that campus. I think that if we do that, if we invest more in that, then and realign resource structures that we already have, we're more likely to see our kids go to those Louisiana universities, and we're more likely to see them stay beyond year one. So
Absolutely.
Those are some things that I would like to see. And of course, elevating the voice of the teacher is always something that's really important to me. Champion the teacher, building strength in school and system leaders is really important because leadership matters. And in COVID, leadership at the local level matters more than ever.
Absolutely. Dr. Brumley, we want to thank you for taking the time. We pray for your health and your well-being during this time, that God would give you the vision on how to move education further, even in these very trying times. And we want to certainly open our platform up for you to come back and share with our listeners and viewers the things that are on your heart and mind for our students and our teachers in Louisiana.
Thanks for having me on Point Talk today. I appreciate it. And look, I believe in us, and I believe in our resolve, and I believe in our intelligence and our strength. And I know that together we're going to get through this, and we'll be stronger because of it.
Indeed. Before you've got to go, Dr. Brumley, give people the website where they can connect.
Yep, it's LouisianaBelieves.com.
There you go. Dr. Cade Brumley, the Louisiana State Superintendent of Education. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Indeed. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back after this.